Joseph Merrick was born on August the 5th, 1862, in Leicester, England, and he was a normal, healthy baby. However, when Joseph was 2 years old, a bony bump began to form on his forehead and a tumor started to grow out of his top lip. His skin was also becoming loose and turning a grayish color with a bumpy texture. Unfortunately for Joseph, this was just the beginning, and as he aged, the right side of his body got considerably larger than the left. His spine began to bend, and it became impossible for him to stand up straight. According to measurements that were taken when he was in his 20s, one of his right hand fingers had a circumference of 5 inches, his wrist had a circumference of 12 inches, and Joseph's head was about 3 feet all the way around and was extremely heavy. In fact, it was so heavy he couldn't rest lying down and had to sleep leaning forward, with his head resting on his knees. His mother, Mary Jane, adored him. Having lost 2 other children at a young age, she was very protective of her son. Joseph was told as a child that his ailment was caused when an elephant startled his mother at a fairground when she was about 6 months pregnant. Joseph was 11 years old when his mother died of pneumonia, and he was devastated, later describing it as the greatest sadness in his life. After his mother's passing, his father decided to remarry to their landlady, who required the young Joseph to drop out of school and go to work. Despite his serious deformities, he was able to find work in a neighborhood cigar shop. But soon his right hand got too big to roll the cigars, and he was unable to work there any longer. So his father got him a peddler's license, and Joseph went door to door selling the gloves from his father's haberdashery shop. But most people were too afraid of him to buy any of his gloves, and he frequently went home empty-handed. His stepmother would not allow him to eat unless he had earned the money to cover the expense of the dinner, and his father would also beat him on a regular basis for not earning a respectable living. Around the age of 17, he fled his abusive home and went to live with his uncle. But this did not last long, as he swiftly lost his peddler's license for upsetting the locals with his strange features. Joseph eventually found himself in the Leicester Union Workhouse, a place for those who are unable to find work and support themselves. Workhouses were unpleasant and depressing places to live, but unable to find any work, Joseph had to stay at the Leicester Workhouse for 5 years. During this time, a growth on his chin grew to the point where he couldn't eat, so he underwent surgery to have the mass removed. In 1884, he decided to try to profit from his deformities and escape life in the workhouse, so he contacted Sam Torr, who was a music hall showman. Sam devised a way to monetize Joseph as a traveling oddities exhibition. Sam assembled a management team for Joseph that included George Hitchcock. They came up with the name The Elephant Man and branded him as half man and half elephant. They began by touring about Joseph's hometown, then in November of that year they traveled to London for the winter season. George Hitchcock approached Tom Norman, also known as the Silver King. He was well known for running penny gaff shops in London. Penny gaffs were so named because admission was usually a penny, and gaffs are the term for spurs used in cockfighting, which was one of the forms of entertainment available in these types of establishments. Penny gaffs were popular among the lower working-class Victorians as a venue to spend an evening out. Along with the cockfighting, there were plays, musical acts, clown displays, and other curiosities. The most popular penny gaffs usually featured some sort of freak show, and Tom Norman's was said to be the best in London. When Hitchcock told him about Joseph, he quickly signed him and placed him in one of his businesses in Whitechapel. The Elephant Man exhibit was housed across the street from the London hospital and was often visited by doctors interested in Joseph's condition. Joseph was eventually invited by a surgeon named Frederick Treves to visit the hospital to be examined. Treves discovered that Merrick's deformities were extremely severe. He had bony protrusions and soft tissue swellings covering much of his body, and he was in physical and psychological distress. His body was filled with tumors, and his leg had deteriorated to the point where he could only walk with the aid of a cane. Treves presented Joseph to the Pathological Society of London in December of that year, and asked Joseph to visit the hospital for further examination. But he refused later, recalling that the experience made him feel like an animal in a cattle market. During this period, Victorian sensibilities were changing, and freak exhibitions were becoming socially unacceptable. By 1885, the police had shut down all of Tom Norman's shows, including Joseph's exhibition. Running out of options, Joseph decided to go on tour with Sam Roper, one of the Leicester managers. However, as the popularity of the oddity exhibitions waned throughout Europe, they quickly discovered that their funding was running out. Roper ended up robbing Joseph of his savings and abandoning him in Belgium. Things didn't get much better for him once he made his way back to London. He was mobbed by a crowd at London's Liverpool Street station and brought into custody by police. Unable to understand him, they searched him and eventually found Frederick Treves' business card from years earlier. Treves evaluated Joseph in the hospital and discovered that his condition had deteriorated significantly during the past 2 years. But the hospital was not set up to care for incurables like Joseph, and it appeared that he would be forced to fend for himself once more. When the chairman of the London hospital was unable to find another hospital who had the facilities to care for Joseph, he decided to publish a letter in the Times detailing Joseph's situation and requesting assistance. The letter sparked a public outpouring of sympathy and financial gifts that were enough to provide Joseph with a home for the rest of his life. In 1887, several rooms of the London hospital were transformed into living quarters for him. Joseph's plight led to him receiving assistance from many members of the British upper class, most notably the actress Madge Kendall and Princess Alexandra of Wales. During his time here in the hospital, Joseph was able to visit the theater and travel to the countryside. He spent his free time in his quarters speaking with Treves, who was one of the few people who could understand him, or creating prose and poetry. He also constructed an intricate cardboard cathedral with the assistance of the nurses, which he sent to Madge Kendall and would ultimately be put on display at the hospital. Joseph's condition was continuing to deteriorating, and he required daily medical treatment. On April the 11th, 1890, he died in his hospital bed at the age of 27. Asphyxia was listed as the official cause of death, as it was believed his head had crushed his windpipe, but a century later it was discovered that he died from a crushed or severed spinal cord after his head fell back when he tried to sleep lying down on his bed like everyone else. Joseph Merrick's skeleton is now housed at Queen Mary's University in their medical school. A sample of his flesh was also saved for medical testing, but his other remains were unaccounted for until Joanne Vigor-Mungovan discovered his location in 2019 after reviewing cemetery data. According to Vigor-Mungovan, Joseph's ultimate burial site was in the same cemetery as 2 of Jack the Ripper's victims. Initially considered to be elephantiasis, the disorder is now thought to be either neurofibromatosis or Proteus syndrome. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.